So I wanted to start off with talking about what the problem we're trying to solve today is. So we're looking to build a sort of custom leave request solution. And the key things I'm looking to do here is easily allow employees to request leave, show them their current allowance, so how much holiday they've taken, how much they've got left. Implement an easy to use multi-stage approval. So I'm going to show you how we can design an approval which sends a request to their manager for approval, and then once approved, depending on how much they request, that might be approved automatically, or it might go to a HR person for approval. I'll show you how we can automatically update their allowance of vacation left, and that's just all managed in a SharePoint list, so a sort of store of employees and vacation allowance. And I'm going to show you how we do all of this inside of Teams. So we're going to focus primarily in Teams. I will drop into SharePoint now and again to show you in SharePoint. So everything I'm showing you today can be done in SharePoint, can also be done on Teams, depending on your preferred working environment. So the key things is here today, I'm going to be showing you two key apps. The main one I'll be showing you is QuizCom Forms. If you've seen QuizCom Forms before, maybe in the past you might have seen the version with classic SharePoint. This is the modern version, which has been out for quite a while now. It's leveraging SPFX custom forms. It leverages those sort of Microsoft Fluent UI design system. Why that's important is it's consistent across different devices. So you're not having to design forms for different devices. It's responsive. It's also, that data doesn't leave your tenant. So this is leveraging Microsoft SPFX, and all the data is being stored natively in SharePoint lists, which can then be surfaced inside of Teams. So we're not installing another app. You're not that data is not going out to another organization's tenant. This is all of your data. And some of the key features I'm going to show you today, I'm going to show you how we can lay out content in a form, so how we can break that down into different tabs of information with maybe conditions to show and hide tabs at different points. We'll show you how you can add additional controls and constraints, default values, warnings when information is not filled in a certain way. I'm not going to specifically show you this today, but I want to call out a couple of the other features of QuizCom Forms. One of those is the multi-row capability, that sort of repeating row functionality, which maybe we saw in InfoPath in the past. So you could include this if maybe, for instance, you wanted to let people book multiple different vacation requests within a single request to their manager. But there's lots of other solutions where you might want, that header footer style interface. I'm also going to be talking briefly about how we can extend forms with scripts. Now, if you're not a developer, don't panic, because QuizCom make a number of pre-prepared scripts available to do things like pull data into your form from other lists, or set fields as read-only. But it is there also, as well as those pre-built scripts, for if you do have access to development resources, then you can extend it further with client-side scripting. And also today's not just about forms. So we're also going to look at the sort of workflow elements of a leave request solution. So things like notifications to managers to say, hey, you've got something to approve. And also how they come in and then action that approval to automatically update the status of the leave request, as well as then going and updating finally the list to say, now this employee's allowance is this. So showing how we can not only send things like notifications, but manipulate data either within that same list or reach out to other lists as well. And that's going to be using two concepts. It's going to be using the activities. So think of those as sort of individual components, reusable tasks within a workflow. And then the custom action is an implementation of multiple activities: send an email, update the status, change a field value. And we can attach conditions to that to make those activities run or not run, or different flavors of those under different conditions. I mentioned I'm going to show two apps today, so I'll mainly look at the form side of things, but I also will touch on a data view plus app as well. So this is all about data visualization. So being able to display information from SharePoint or other data sources like Excel or the graph in quite rich ways. You may have been on some of my other webinars where I delved into this in a bit more detail. So this is how maybe we want to display vacation information in all sorts of different rich ways with formatting and grouping and filtering. So the example I'm going to show you today is how we can add a calendar into our teams. Quite useful, whether that's for a company as a whole or even an individual department, to be able to actually visualize these vacation requests inside of Teams, but in a calendar interface. So I can quickly and easily see who is not available, who's actually away. So that's what I'm going to show you. We'll start off by just giving you a bit of background in terms of what's been set up. I'll show you a simple request. Then we'll look behind the scenes about how some of that is configured and maybe make a few changes to it depending on time today. As Sarah says, please submit questions during the course of the demo and the rest of this webinar, and we should get time to answer them at the end. Okay, so I'm just going to come out of my PowerPoint and I'm going to switch over to the browser. Now, I'm going to use two users today because I need to be an approver as well. Just zoom in a little bit so you can see that a little bit better. So I'm currently logged in as a guy called Joe, and he's going to come in and make a request, but I'll just show what's been set up first of all. So I've got two lists inside of SharePoint, and we'll switch over to Teams in a second, but SharePoint's a good way to explain what's under the hood here. So firstly, I've got a list called Employee Vacations. And that's going to show me all of my employees. So I've just set up a list here with employee names and then their total amount of vacation, the amount they've taken, and then I've got a calculated column which is just showing me how many days they've got left, as well as who their manager is. So I'm going to be, when I do a new request, I'm going to be pulling through things like who's their manager, how many holidays have they got left to be able to take. I've also got a second request list here where people can come in and make multiple requests for leave, and then those requests will be approved or rejected by their manager. Those two same lists can easily be added within Teams. So you can just use the standard Microsoft Lists app to add these. So you see here I've got one for leave requests and one for employee vacation. So native built into Teams. So here, Joe can come and make a new request for leave. So he comes and does that. And I'm not presented with just a completely standard native form. I'm presented with something which is immediately customized. And we're saying exactly the same inside of SharePoint as well. So I'm making a request for myself. And notice straight away, I'm pulling through information from that other vacations list. So I've got my manager is pulled in, my vacation days is pulled in, and my days remaining are taken in. Also note, when I've not got a employee defined, the request details tab is hidden. So not only can I break my form up, I can hide it, certain sections, when I don't want them to be displayed. So firstly, pulling in information from other lists dynamically. As I mentioned, I've got that tab. I can lay out information. So often we've got lots of fields and we don't want users to have to scroll down, so we can break that up across different tabs of information. Again, all of this works natively in SharePoint as well. We can put text boxes, dividers, we can lay fields out on our form across singular or multiple columns. And I can come in here and I can make a new request. Let's take some time off in January. Christmas will be a really busy time for me, so I fancy some post. Let's say I'm going to have some post Christmas rest, and I'm going to hit that and submit it. Now what that's going to do is it's going to add a new request to my list, and then using an action which I built within QuizCon Forms, that's going to do a number of activities. And to show you that, I'm just going to switch over to another browser session just so I can show you a manager user briefly. So just switching browser sessions here, and I'm now logged in as a user called Andrew. Now you may remember in my list where I had all of the employees and their allowance, I'd had Andrew specified as one of the approvers, in this case for Joe. We'll see that Andrew's received an email, so he's got an approval task to do, and I'll show you in a minute how these emails are all customized. I've got a link to my request, so I can go straight into it. And one thing you'll notice is the menu looks slightly different here. I've got approve and reject here. If I briefly just switch back to Joe and he clicks into the request, he doesn't see those options, yeah? So that's something which is unique to the user, and I'm going to show you how what we're doing here on those buttons is that's running another action to go and do something based on whatever outcome Andrew decides. And those actions those buttons can be presented conditionally. So in this case, it's only available to the manager of this specific user. So again, it will be dynamic based on the user requesting. So I'm going to go ahead and approve that request. And what that's going to do is then it's going to go and set the status of this request to be approved, and it's going to go and update my vacations list as well. So let's just switch back to Joe, because we'll finish the rest of our demo today as him. I just needed to sort of show you an approving user. And we can see here, here's my request, which I've just filled in from Joe, and it went to Andrew, and we can see the status is approved. And if we go and look at our vacation list, we can see that the number of days taken has increased. So I've gone from 5 to 7, and I've now only got 3 days left. So that request in one list, in my leave request list, has gone and updated my item in my vacations list. So influencing data in other lists if I want to. So let's show you a little bit about how some of that is built. So first of all, these are just 2 regular SharePoint lists, but I've enhanced them. So I've enhanced this leave request list, and I can do that all directly inside of SharePoint. So I've got this little configure menu here, and this will show me all of the QuizCon apps which I've got installed and available to configure in my SharePoint site. So the first one I've got here is the form layout. And this allows me to lay out my form across multiple tabs. So I've got one tab here which has employee details, and I've got another tab here which is request details. And I can come in and add additional tabs, as well as apply conditions about when certain tabs appear. So in this case, I was saying only show this tab when the employee field is not empty. So this is really useful if we want to take people on the journey to show tabs at certain points. We can even do things like show tabs only to certain users. So maybe I only want to show it to them, a certain tab to the manager, for example, or hide certain tabs from the manager. Within a tab, we can define the layout. So we can come in here and say what columns we're displaying. And we can also very easily add and control the layout of my columns, as well as adjusting the width. So very easy to lay out my columns across, one or more columns add my relevant fields, define how many rows I want, and lay out each tab very quickly and easily, much quicker than I would be able to do that using, coding or anything else like that. What else can we do? Let's come and look at some of our other apps. So another one we can do is we can introduce constraints. So we can say, well, actually, I only want certain things to happen. So for instance, I had a constraint on my form to say that the start date is a required field. If I tried to submit my form without a start date, it would error. Let's just briefly show you that. So if I went in here and I said, oh, I'd like a new leave request, and I won't fill anything else in. It will actually it will show some invalid items and it will display my error message. So it's really simple for us to put in place, and we can even expand on that if we want to with additional constraints. Let's show another example to you so you can see how it works. So if we go into our field constraints, I can come in here and I can say, well, actually, I would say my sort of successful condition is it's greater than, and you can use dynamic properties like today and me for person fields as well. So I could say today plus 7, and I could say, well, actually, if it's greater than or equal to 7, that's good. Otherwise, I can say the start day must. I could say you can only book leave 7 days in advance. So just adding a simple validation to say, well, actually, we don't want people booking leave at really short notice. We want to say, well, actually, we want them to book it 7 days in advance. So I can quickly go in and add that rule, and then that one's immediately available on my form to start to use. So I can build up these rules and I can pick the columns which I build them up against. There's other options I can do here. So for instance, I can come in and set default values for columns, as well as doing things like dynamic column permissions. So I might want to say that a certain field can't be completed under a certain state, or even that it's because of a specific user. So I might say that end date could only be completed, so only show it, hide it, or disable it. And I can also say under what condition it occurs. So I might say, well, I'm going to disable the end date until the start date is set. So we can do all sorts of simple conditions to control showing, hiding, disabling fields. In the same way, I can show and hide tabs based on conditions as well. And again, that can be user driven as well. Now, I mentioned that sort of scripting capability. Let's have a little look at that quickly. So if I come in here and I go to new, one of the things I showed you was as I entered the employee, it pulled through fields from other lists, and also that these fields are read-only. Now, don't worry, this isn't something which is super complicated to do because QuizCom help you with this. So if I come in here to script editor, you can, of course, build your own scripts using the event handlers, which QuizCom make available. But fortunately for people like me, there's also a number of pre-built scripts for all sorts of scenarios, such as calculating fields, or in this case, getting additional columns, or setting fields to be read-only. So here I'm using the one which is, well, what this will do is we'll add that sample into your script editor, and then you can make really simple changes. So for example, here it says, what list am I looking up? So I can say in this case, my list is employee vacations, but if it was called something else, you could just change that. And then I'm saying, what's the field in my source list, my looked up list, and what's the field name in my form? So what am I pulling through? What am I going to go and put that value in? So they can be different. And then I'm saying here, what is the value which I'm querying on? So I'm looking in the list to look up employee, and have a field name of employee, but you could call that person or whatever it might be to go and do that query. And it's exactly the same. You don't need to change the rest of this. This is a bit which QuizCom tell you need to change. And then exactly the same principle for read-only fields. So I can come in here and I can just set the list of fields which I want to set as read-only. So again, it will pull through that pre-built script for setting fields to be read-only. And then I can come in here and set which ones I want them to be read-only. So really useful if you just need to sort of set that always to be read-only with scripting. Okay, so that's how we can leverage some of the form scripts. Let's move on and have a look at those activities and actions. So those bits which happened behind the scenes to send notifications, approve the request, etc. So let's go and firstly, I'll look at those sort of component pieces, those activities. And then we'll have a look at how we construct those into an action. So you see here, I've got a number of different activities and I can use one or more, and I can also variabilize these activities so they become reusable. So some good examples of that. Let's look at some of the emails. So I've got an email here for send approval request. And so when I go and configure an activity, I say, what is it you're doing? Am I going to add an item, copy an item, or in this case, send an email? I can then set the properties. So who's it going to? And notice one of the things here is I can insert a token. So I can take the current user. I can take columns from my list, or I can define a variable. And with variables, you can call it whatever you like. But the point of having a variable here is then I can dynamically set it when I'm using it within my action. And I'll show you that in a second. And we can go and define things like the address, display name, subject, and maybe I want to make a quick change to that. So new vacation request submitted from, and maybe I want like the employee name in here. So I'll create a new variable and let's just put it exactly where I want it. Let's put it here and we'll just call the variable, let's call it EMP for employee, yeah? And I'll show you how we leverage that in a minute. While I'm here, let's just show a few of the other things which we can do. So for instance, we can do things like set a request status. So here I'm going and updating an item, and I'm choosing what item I'm updating. So in this case, I'm updating the current item, the item this action is, this activity is going to be used against within an action. So updating this leave request, and I'm just setting the status, whatever field I want, to be whatever value I want. Other things I can do is I can go and update the vacations taken. So that once it's been approved, I can go and update an item. But look here how I'm updating an other item. So I'm not updating the current item, I'm updating an item from my other list in my site, or potentially a completely different site. But in this case, I'm updating the employee vacations list. And again, I'm using variables here. So I'm saying when employee equals an employee, I'm going to define in the action. And then I'm updating it using a value of new days taken. And we'll have a look at how we set those two values within the action. So I'm building up these reusable activities. I then have several custom actions available to me to run at different steps. So I have one which runs when the request is added. And in this case, it will then go and do, it will update the current item. And then it will go and send the email. And look, both my variables are available to set here. I've already set the one for manager, but I haven't now set the one for employee. So I want to dynamically set that variable within my action. And that allows me to pull data from my list to use. So I can come in here and I can go, actually, I want to pull through an item property. I know there's all sorts of properties here, but I want to pull through an item property, and I'm just going to pull through the employee column. So it's going to take that employee name, and it's just going to put that in the subject dynamically. So really quick and easy to use those variables. Let's go and have a look at some of the other custom actions I've got here. So let's have a look at the one for manager approval. So if the manager approves the request, now notice this one's a bit different. I should have mentioned this previously. The first one on request added is something called an automatic action. So that will run based on something happening, an item being updated, an item being deleted, an item being added. These ones are buttons. So you may have remembered that when we went into approve as Andrew, we had a button which said approved and a button which said rejected. So there we've got a couple of actions, and these are ribbon button actions. We can define the text, we can add URLs, we can say what happens when it's completed, and we can also add conditions. So we can say, well, actually, this button will only be displayed where the status is equal to new and the manager is equal to me. So logged in user. So when Andrew logged in, he saw the button. When any other user logs in, they won't see the button. Obviously, they would do if they were approving a request which they were a manager for. And then in here, we can build up a series of activities. So we can build up those reusable activities. So we can come in here. And the nice thing in here is I've also used something called activity groups. So I've got two different groups of activities. One is where the request is greater than or equal to 5. And then one is when it's less than or equal to 5. So I can say different activities happen under different conditions. So for example, when it's greater than 5, I'm reusing that same approval request email, but in this case, I'm just sending it to a specific user. So Peter for approval. And that's because we need an extra authorization for that request 5 or more days. And then we'll have equivalent approval button actions for that user to complete. Alternatively, if it's below 5 days, then I'm going to update the current item using that update status activity I built. I'm going to go and get the number of days requested. And then finally, I'm going to do an action to say update the employee vacations list, because that's already defined in my activities, but I'm setting my variables to say the employee equals the employee from my request, as well as setting a new days taken, which calculates their current vacation days with the number of days requested. So I can easily sort of update my variables dynamically on the fly and update other list items. And as I explained, I've also got an equivalent button action for approval or rejection by HR. And we can build those out with other email notifications or other things which we wanted them to do. Now I'm just using buttons. You can also do approvals using tasks. So instead of using a button, which I think is quite neat, but equally you could go off and create task items for people to approve. Once they're approved, have automatic actions to come back and approve the leave request. So same sort of option, entirely up to you about how you execute it. So that's really a bit about how we can leverage activities and actions. Finally, I want to show you how I built this calendar component. So I've got this vacation calendar. So I've got the DataView Plus app installed within my tenant already, and this allows me to display data in different data sources and display them in all sorts of rich ways. So one of those is a calendar control. We can see the calendar presented here, displaying information from my SharePoint list. This is really super easy to configure. So if I come in and configure the settings, worth saying also DataView Plus can be used in SharePoint as well as Teams. And I can come in and configure my data source. So I can say, well, what am I connecting to? Those range of data sources. And then in my case, the SharePoint list, which list am I configuring into, as well as mapping in the various columns which I'm going to use. And I have a range of ways of presenting that data dependent on what I'm doing. In this case, it's a calendar control. Once this is added, I can then start to customize my control. I can do things like configure options around the calendar. It comes with pre-built options, but I can switch those over into advanced mode and make more complex customization. I can also come in here and I can use this sort of Lego style interface to build up different options, such as the filter you see here, the conditional formatting, as well as grouping, tabs, and other options. So I'm just going to come in and I'm going to add a really simple conditional formatting. So I'm going to say, well, I want to highlight the background color in, let's choose red, of any items where the employee is equal to Joe. And I'm just going to save and close that, and that will be done. And then I might well build that up and have Melissa and Lisa different highlighted colors because I want to have some conditional formatting. Equally, I could have built out this filter experience to say, well, actually, I'm only interested in being able to filter and search on specific employees. So I can, in here, I can either search or I can actually look and say, well, actually, I only want to see Joe's in here, and it'll filter that calendar really quickly. Now, that's just an example of doing it with calendars, but we can also do that and present it in more of a list tabular type format, or even do that in a you know, an org chart data if we were working with organizational information. So that really brings me to the end of the demo. Let's just briefly return to the slides for a quick wrap up, and then we should have some time for questions today. First thing to say is all of these apps are very easy to install. You can configure and launch the installation process directly from the QuizCon website, which will guide you through the installation process. And just some key points in summary. I actually normally mention this at the beginning, but all of these apps are designed for non-technical business users to configure. This is all done natively within SharePoint, and you can leverage it directly in Teams. It's very quick and easy to build out. You can set this up in minutes, not hours. And as I said, you can work in SharePoint, you can work in Teams, you can work in both, whatever your preference. You can implement all those business rules, the layout of your forms, conditions, constraints, very simply directly in the browser without coding. But if you have got developers, there are options with scripting to extend that capability, or to use some of the pre-built samples if you're less familiar with code, like myself. And that really brings us to the end of the webinar. So hopefully we've had a few questions. So I'll hand back to Sarah and she can ask them away, and one of us will hopefully be able to answer them for you.